Here are 5 principles to improve your relationships from the inside out. Too often we fall into the trap of trying to fix things in our relationships, whether we're trying to fix a problem, fix the problem, fix the person, fix ourselves. But real connection doesn't come from fixing. It comes from presence. So these principles are invitations, really, to relate in a way that brings more listening, more love, and ultimately transformation for you and the relationship itself. So let's get into it. So these 5 principles that I want to talk about today are sort of informed by a bunch of different things. If you've seen some of my other videos, you know that I have a spiritual practice. I learned from A Course in Miracles. I learned from Taoism. I learned from so many lineages that are all going to the same, mountaintop. But I also have had training in life coaching, and it's very sort of compatible and resonant with a lot of these spiritual teachings, especially the life coaching that I've been trained in, which is ICF, or the International Coaching Federation's sort of client-centered, client-empowering model. And while at least on the surface, of course we would want clients to be empowered, as a life coach, it's our duty to get out of the way of the client's own journey, their own healing. A Course in Miracles talks about getting out of the way of healing because the unhealed healer doesn't realize that they're not the ones that are the healer. The healer is actually the person who experiences the healing, and it's about getting out of the way and facilitating that healing. Much in the same way for coaches with coaching clients, it's about getting out of the way for those sort of healings or maybe coaching to occur. So a coach is really more of a facilitator for, in Course in Miracles speak, the Holy Spirit that the person who they are coaching has access to. In some ways, it's almost like, as a coach, I'm not even doing the coaching. In many ways, I'm more sort of the witness to the coaching happening, but nevertheless play an important role in that witnessing, in those questions I might ask, in that listening. So even though that I've kind of come across these sort of principles from coaching, from A Course in Miracles, from other spiritual traditions, from other spiritual practices, they're really foundational to any relationship. And as I started practicing these things in my relationships, and believe me, I still have a long way to go, but I am definitely aspirational here, that these principles have helped so much. And it's amazing when you just kind of recognize or acknowledge the teaching and then say, well, let me see, if this works. And sure enough, it works pretty well. So let's get into the 5 principles. No time to waste. These are definitely not tips for managing people, fixing things, as I mentioned in the intro. They really are like invitations for how we might relate differently from the inside out, like the inside, not just of our relationships outward to other relationships, but the inside of ourselves as beings that are necessarily connected and not separate from other people. All right. So principle number 1, listening is an act of love. So your first role in any relationship is to listen, not to solve, not to fix, not even to act per se, not to act in form, maybe we might say. And listening itself is an act of love. So it is doing something, even if it looks like, or when it looks like it's doing nothing. So sort of a false dichotomy to say listening versus acting, but it's sort of like, before you take an action in form, like taking a step forward, or as the Tao Te Ching talks about, it's better to, rather than make the first move, it's better to wait and see in times of like war or conflict. Much in the same way, it's better to listen as your first action than to skip over listening to try to do some other action in form, rearranging the surfaces of the circumstance. Instead, we listen as that first act. And sure enough, we listen as an act of love. So you might wonder, like, what if I have something that's really important to say as this person's telling me what's going on with them? That's totally fine. It's just important that if it's truly, truly important to you, it will remain after you've done the listening, after you've taken that first important action of love. So listening first opens the space for something that, it's like for everything else, I should say, to come through more clearly. And then if you have something important to say, by all means, of course, say it. That's what we're here to do. We're here to communicate as best we can. But communication is much more effective when we've allowed that listening to happen, when we've allowed ourselves to be in that presence, as I mentioned, in a relationship. It's that space of presence that so many of our relationships are starved for, and nevertheless is still accessible at all times. And so this is one step, and all these principles are, to sort of entering into that space of peace, we might say, together. So number one, listening is an act of love. All right, number two, this is definitely an important one. I'm sure you're familiar with this kind of thing. Number two is triggers are teachers. So when someone pushes your buttons, that's another way to say trigger. Trigger obviously is a very it's been used a lot, it's a heated word, but it's when somebody pushes your buttons. It doesn't have to be a deep traumatic thing. It could be, but it could be anything that's annoying, because anything that irritates us or makes us uncomfortable is striking some chord with something that goes a little bit deeper down. And so it's important to recognize that as much as we can ostracize people that trigger us, it's not about them. It's about you. It's about me. If I'm triggered by something, uncomfortable by something, it's about me, and I'm thinking about this all the time. It's like, it's a practice to remember, oh, right, what's going on with me that is allowing this to even be a button to press in the first place? And so being triggered is not a failure. It's not a failure on the person who triggered you. It's not a failure on you who are triggered, but it is up to us to take responsibility for what we're feeling, what we're perceiving, what we're projecting out onto the world, onto our own bodies, onto ourselves. And it's an invitation to meet a part of yourself with compassion. And when I say a part of yourself, it's not just like a part, an IFS speak of like inside my own internal family system, but a part of myself as the person I'm in relationship with is a part of myself, capital S, as well. So it certainly doesn't mean like staying in harm's way. Boundaries are important, but boundaries are really even more valuable when we understand why we're being triggered, what projection is involved in that, and then we can set the proper boundaries and bridges when it's right, so that we can engage in a place and a space of trust when the triggers get triggered, when the buttons get pushed. And it's important to remember that this emotional reaction, this trigger, is still our teacher. The trigger is the teacher. So I might ask, what if they're actually in the wrong here? Maybe they are. But if they are, even then, you get to choose how you grow from the experience. So, for example, if I'm sort of like, I wouldn't say I'm an organization freak, but, I like to keep things very organized, like in my studio all the time. Let's say for some reason I came in and I had a friend who had stayed here, and they left my room like a total mess. And maybe not a super mess by their standards, like it's not that much different than how they would normally live, but it was much more of a mess than how I like to keep things, and it's not organized. So it's not a question, I could say maybe they're in the wrong. They should have left it the way that they had it when they, first arrived, leave things the way you found them. But I get to choose how I grow from this experience. So for example, I might get triggered by it, keep the sort of annoyance pent up and say, I'm not going to let friends stay here anymore. And use that as a way to avoid the trigger. And that's what I learned from the lesson. That's learning through the ego, through avoidance, through separation. If I instead say, oh, I was triggered by this, I should communicate about this to them. I should be honest with them about how it made me feel. And I should look at this through the lens of love, through recognizing that they didn't mean any harm. They didn't mean to do anything wrong. And I don't mean to do anything wrong either, but it's important that we honor this situation and that I honor my feelings. And then what I learned through that experience is that communication is so important, and that communication can sort of breed or kind of make way for connection in that situation. So triggers are definitely teachers. Number 3, don't make their pain about you. So this is kind of taking the next step in that direction. So, often when somebody lashes out or shuts down or pulls away or gets really anxious about something, we can feel, I know for myself, I can feel like a little bit of a fight or flight response of, oh my gosh, did I do something wrong? And, everybody has different ways of kind of getting triggered by other people getting triggered or whatever. But it really has little to do with us, as individuals. We can acknowledge their pain, absolutely, but without assuming that it's our own fault, ours to fix, basically without taking it on. So you might feel guilt come up. You might feel rejection rise up. But what if this is your invitation to anchor in your own worth? You know what I mean? Their storm doesn't have to become the weather that you're in. You can just see, oh man, you're in a crazy storm right there. And in reality, you will end up being more useful and supportive to that person if you don't also see things through the lens in which they're seeing. It doesn't mean you don't take attempts to empathize or open sort of your mind to what they're experiencing, but to say, I hear you, and listen without getting caught up in the way that they're perceiving and projecting onto the world and their own sort of constructed reality from their ego. All right. So number 4, this is kind of related to the number 1, listening, but now that we've had principles 1, 2, and 3, this is one I definitely want to share. Principle number 4, silence is your friend, and you don't have to respond immediately to anything. So silence certainly is not the absence of connection. Oftentimes, especially at the beginning of relationships, it can start to feel that way because we feel like we need to fill the space with opportunities to connect. But it's important to recognize that this silence, this space, is the space in which deeper connection actually can grow because it's presence without pressure. So whether it's in conversation or in conflict or in healing, silence can hold more than words can say. You know, like a picture is worth 1,000 words, a photo is worth 1,000 words. Silence is worth millions and billions of words. So if you feel anxious in the quiet, that's kind of a good thing. Let that discomfort be your guide. It's definitely not like a punishment for you doing anything wrong and not filling the space. It's a doorway to meet that person in a space that is more present, more connected than any word could ever be for us. All right. So as I was saying in that, I was talking about silence when you're actually with the person. Obviously, I'm not talking about when you're just like totally ignoring someone or someone's totally ignoring you. Obviously, silence in those terms is not at all connection. That's avoidance and sort of like denial of maybe what's going on. However, the silence there would also contain millions and billions of words. It's just then you do need to talk about it. But that is a little bit different than like the beginning of a relationship where you want to fill the space. In some ways, allowing for the silence early on, especially if it's a romantic relationship, means that when the time comes later, you've already established this foundation of silence and presence. And so if you aren't saying anything or you don't hear from them during the day because you're both busy at work or something, and then you come together later, just being in that silence together, and even though there was time where you were apart, you've built a foundation where just because you don't fill the space with words, whether you're with them or not, you can still rest in this trust together. So hopefully that makes sense. Certainly don't avoid your partners or people you're in relationships with. I mean, certainly if you like need to take time to respond or say something, like by all means, but yeah, I've definitely mean silence when you're actually with the person and, just don't want to have this space, because ultimately that space is a good thing. And even if it's awkward and uncomfortable at first. So hope that makes sense. All right, let's get back into it. So yes, no, and I don't know, not yet, or not answering are all totally sacred, honorable responses. You're allowed to pause. You don't have to say yes or no right when somebody asks you to do something, right when somebody asks your opinion about something, when somebody wants to make plans with you. In fact, taking a moment to feel into your truth is often the most loving thing you can do. It's really for you and the relationship, because the way you'll be coming through in the relationship will be more honest, more sincere, more thoughtful, more present. And for yourself, you'll be teaching yourself at a deep level that I don't have to rush anything. You know what I mean? So it puts us in a better place all around, but it starts from the inside of giving ourselves the permission not to answer if we don't want to, or to answer differently than we think we're supposed to. That's definitely one I'm working on. But I really appreciate this particular principle to practice. So maybe you'd be worried that, well, people think I'm rude for not answering or avoiding them. Maybe. But your job really is not to perform something. Oh man. And that one, that one for me is like very important. And I think for a lot of us, it's important because our egos tell us that we need to perform. Ultimately though, it's to respond from clarity, from peace, and not the pressure. So responding from a place of clarity, not rushing. And then our response is unrushed. So principle number 5. honor the differences. This is a very interesting one because I think, especially in sort of spiritual practice, there's a temptation to want to see everything as unified and see that like we're all the same, we're all one. And in truth, on one level, that is true. But on another level, and we can't deny this other level, this level 2 that we're on, we're in a world of differentiality. And true unity does not require sameness. It doesn't, in a sense, true unity will be sameness, but not at this level of form. If we're in form, we at a deep assumptive belief level believe that things are different and separate, and we need to honor the fact that we believe that to be the case. Even if it's not true in capital R reality, we need to honor it. So like I said, true unity does not really require sameness in practice. Real connection isn't pretending we're all the same. It's actually honoring the differences while remaining connected in love. So we live in this world of multiplicity, and that's not a mistake, really. I mean, the belief that we're in a world of multiplicity is a mistake. It's a mistaken sort of identification. But the fact that now we believe that the world appears to be in multiplicity because of our belief is not a mistake. It's a necessary effect of the cause. You know, effects leave not their cause, ideas leave not their source. And so this world of multiplicity now can become our classroom if we listen to the Holy Spirit as our teacher, as A Course in Miracles talks about. So like I said, you might wonder, but wait, aren't we all one in truth? And yes, while that's true, we appear as many because of this sort of like curriculum that we now have. And of course, maybe we didn't establish it as a curriculum before, but it can be used as a curriculum now. So it's really how love is learning to see itself in all its forms. Ultimately, that's what we're doing here, you know? And as we learn more, we honor those differences and we find the connection by honoring the differences, because if we turn away from the differences, that's just another way to be separate. Instead, we honor what we're seeing, as A Course in Miracles talks about. We look at the crucifixion. In other words, we look at the sort of the thing that was made in terms of sin, guilt, and fear, and violence, and death, and whatever things the ego has made up. And we say, okay, I see this, and I clearly am very attached to this. So what can we do about it now? Rather than saying, oh, well, that's not real. That doesn't exist. That's not real. Yeah, in truth, maybe it doesn't exist. But if you're saying that and you're in this form, then, you know, some part of you believes it. And so we need to be honest about that. So we can honor the differences. So to say all 5 again, just to recap a little bit. Principle number 1, listening is an act of love. Principle number 2, triggers are teachers. Principle number 3, don't make their pain about you. Principle number 4, silence is your friend and you don't have to respond immediately. That's my favorite one. And number 5, of course, is honor the differences. So you probably get by now, these principles are not about having control over other people. That's the ego's game. These principles are based in love's game, are based in the game of waking up from the dream, of the Holy Spirit's teaching, of love's teaching, light's teaching, Christ's teaching, the Tao's teaching, God's teaching, your teaching, capital S self, yourself's teaching. And they really can help you walk into hopefully every relationship with more presence, more peace, and inner strength. And if one of these principles speaks to you, maybe just try experimenting with that one this week. Maybe it's just allowing for a little bit more like empty space in a conversation with someone you're close to. Maybe it's you're about to meet somebody and saying, okay, when I meet this person and I feel a gap in our conversation, I'm going to take a deep breath, have a nice long exhale, and just let that space be there and see if I can still feel connected with them. And maybe even more connected than if I filled the space with words. And then as the next thought comes up, great. And see how it shifts your experience. You know, it may be any of these principles. And it's not just like shifting the experience for others or the relationships, but just for yourself too, you know? Like in some ways, meditation is like allowing the awkward silence with ourselves. You know what I mean? So may you listen deeply. May your silences be rich. May your relationships become these sacred classrooms of love, as A Course in Miracles talks about, allowing them to be transformed into holy relationships rather than just special love or special hate relationships, to really be able to transform all who are involved and awaken us all to the love that we truly are. So If any of this was helpful, if you're surprised by any of these principles, or maybe there's something I didn't mention that you feel like would go really well with this, definitely let me know in the comments. And till next time, I'll see you then. Peace. Between dimensions of you, it's all that I do. It's as simple as that. Just let it be true.